Yeah, I want to welcome everyone back. This is a continuing series of INTERPHEX Live, the virtual version for INTERPHEX 2020. We've had several key speakers that came in with key information, and the folks at Reed felt it was important to our industry that we maintain this stream of information that we would customarily have on a live. Just to put it into context, folks, this is normally we would be sitting in the Crystal Palace at the Jacob Javits Center. Today, my speaker, or my friend Bharat, and I, we're kind of sitting in New Jersey. we're gonna talk about this stuff. And with that said, today Bharat Rao is a principal and national leader at KPMG here, actually in Montvale, New Jersey. But what we'll be discussing is how leveraging data will transform the pharma industry, and I think the key piece there is a lot of people are talking about the lockdown. A lot of people are talking about the impact of the current health situation, but I think there's many different facets to it. And I found our preparatory talk with Bharat was enlightening and unbelievable. So based on that, I also wanted to note that just everybody, so Bharat's got like 25 years of experience in massaging data. So when it comes to understanding the implication of data and its effect on our industry, this is the place to be. He's having been in the health business and health data management and that area. So pretty much this is where we're going to be coming from. So let me ask you the first question there, Bharat. So how do you think the current COVID situation is going to affect the pharmaceutical industry as we know it? And what about the emerging technologies? What is your take on that? How things are going to change?
So obviously there's a whole set of things. So thank you, Russell, for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. Hi to the audience. Obviously, there's a whole host of things we can talk about regarding vaccines and drugs, etc. But let me start by talking about data. We have been on a journey on all things digital for a while now, and if there's one thing and I thought this sort of digital transformation would occur probably around 2030, 2028 or so in a large way. If anything, the COVID pandemic has accelerated that. Just look at this. We are sitting there, not in the Javits Center, New Jersey. We're sitting here 300-400 miles away from each other chatting, right? This is how business is being done this day. So there's that transformation. The second is there isn't a day that goes by where everybody, regardless of industry, doesn't go look at your favorite site, whether it's Johns Hopkins to see what the spread of the virus is, CNN or KPMG's own site where we provide updates on and predictions. So the use of data is ubiquitous, right? The word epidemiologist and data scientist, data scientists have entered the lexicon. So how is this going to impact pharma? Well, pharma is at the epicenter of how, obviously, the healthcare doctor is at the front line, but right behind is the pharma industry that is enabling and equipping the physicians to deal with the disease, enabling and equipping the public to deal with the disease. There are other things that are happening with the use. So for instance, just take information regarding which patients are susceptible, which patients are likely to get the virus. We have now detailed information on risk profiles. We now have contact tracing apps that can trace who you're in contact with. We have this wealth of data being accumulated. Hospitals are now starting to collect data about other pieces of information for patients, their test results, the genetic sequence, the severity of disease. All this is enabling us to think about targeted drugs and accelerating that push in the whole life sciences biotech area to try to deal with this. Wearable devices, wearable sensors to gather data, contact tracing is just one example, is another area where we're moving. And how does this work? Well, as I said, when I talk about the digital transformation, I used to say that, by 2028, there won't be a drug or a device that's prescribed without without an app next to it, right? I think that's going to happen now. I think you're not going to get, you're going to do this to track your adherence to what you're doing. You're going to do that to track your compliance, for pharma to communicate, life sciences to communicate directly to you. If you have a device, whether it's a hip implant or or a pacemaker, to be able to gather data about how that's functioning, stream it back live, whether to the manufacturer to get maintenance done, whether to your physician who wants to see how this. That's the way data and analytics are going to change, and you need analytics because you're going to get this explosion of data coming in. And all that does is drown you in noise. But with analytics, whether it's AI, machine learning, statistics, or simple BI, I view that as a continuum. You need to extract these key insights that will help you to do this. Whether you're a physician trying to treat the patient better, whether you're an individual or a caregiver trying to manage your disease or a loved one's disease, whether you're a pharma company or a device company, whether you're a pharma company trying to communicate directly to the consumer, whether you are a device company that's monitoring the health of your device, whether you're trying to look at follow-on medicines, etc., that's going to completely change this.
Bro, I think one of the things that we talked about was, how this is going to set the stage for real world, evidential use, because everybody's in the big rush. Everybody wants to make the first to market, and rightly so, the vaccines. So the question really is, how is it setting the stage for real world evidence? I mean, we're talking about, where we're starting to migrate, but let's look at right now. We got many firms looking for vaccines, and we're talking about timelines.
Yep.
So how this evidential proof of clinical efficacy, and how are we going to what is your take on that?
So great question, Russ. So going back in time, a different time, like 2006, 2008, I took a couple of software devices for a PMA, which is essentially the process drugs go through, the pre-market approval, and several through 510K. And as early as then, I had discussions with the FDA about, look, it's we have these studies which we're doing where we collect a population, we carefully preserve them, and we try to determine, whether they react to the drug or not. And it's very important we have a control arm, we have an arm, and we can measure the effects. And that is important. The double-blind randomized clinical trial is critical. But let's look at some of the issues with this, right? So let's say you have a lung cancer drug that you're trying. Let's stay away from COVID for a second, right? You have a lung cancer drug you're trying to get to market. So what do? I mean, typically you'll get a group of people, let's say 300, if that's the power of your study, lung cancer patients. They'll all be under 55. They'll have no comorbidities. In fact, they'll be so healthy they could probably run a marathon even with their lung cancer. I'm not trying to make light of it. And then on this study, you do a drug and you say, oh, great, my improvement when I look at the control arm versus the other arm is 17%. Huge. Important. Let's put this drug in the market. Then along comes a doctor, and along comes a patient, and this is an 82-year-old patient who doesn't just have lung cancer, but has heart disease, dementia, diabetes, and doesn't comply with their medicine. If we are taking 6 phases of the trial, the 6 cycles, they only take 2 and they drop out, whatever, right? And suddenly you have this real world where maybe it's not 17 percentage points, maybe there's no impact at all, right? And part of the problem is that you don't have a trial for an 82-year-old person. You just can't get enough of those people to do this trial with that particular set of conditions, but that's whom you've got to apply it. So now, if you take evidence-based medicine, which is, let's say, randomized, double-blind, randomized clinical trials, and then you take experience-based medicine, I'm just making this word up, which is how the drug or the medicine is doing in the wild given to all comers. You actually get to see what is the profile, where this works, where this doesn't work, right? And of course you have problems. You have problems because, the data, the 2 cohorts of people aren't exactly equal. You really can't say, did they complete all 6 cycles? Some took 3, some took 2. There's another important question. How many cycles is really important? Because you can actually measure it. Do you have to really give all 6 to have benefit? Do you get 80% of benefit if you get 3? It isn't ethical to do a study to withhold the standard of care, but that happens all the time, so you can measure it. So I think we're going to transition to a point very soon where we'd go from today where it is, which is 99% medicine is done through evidence-based medicine clinical trials, to a scenario where you'll have, let's say, a smaller portion, the evidence-based trial, and you'd have a much larger group of what I'd call experience-based to validate whether this worked or not after getting speedy approval for an indication. In fact, now coming to COVID, you see this happening. There are a number of investigational studies around the use, for instance, of convalescent plasma to see if it works, that of being fast-tracked as experimental drugs. They're not necessarily going to be powered. You're going to, some of this, and you're going to see what the value is, but you're also going to be able to measure how it's doing in the wild. So now let's take it to COVID and vaccines that you talked about. When I last checked, there are 110 vaccines under development. God bless the world. Every company, life sciences, biotech, is working. One of them, in fact, is right about to enter. Is Moderna is about to enter phase 3 in July. Fantastic, right? But the point of the matter is being able to measure whether it works. And companies are doing great. They're actually manufacturing ahead, doing great investments so that they can distribute the vaccine and be geared up as opposed to a traditional 5-year process to shorten it 12 to 18 months. But you're simply not going to be able to power the study well enough, and nor are you going to be able to measure, hey, is this thing really working when I look out for a while? How valid is it? Right? If you wait for that period of time, really, if you want to see is it effective 18 months from now, well, you have to wait 18 months. You can't do that. You want to get it out. The second thing is, is it strong enough for elderly people, which is we know, they're immune compromised. So for people who are older who have immune compromise in other ways due to comorbidities, is the dose strong enough? You've got to produce it, you've got to get it out there, and then you have to measure it. And that's where the real world evidence comes in, right? To see what is actually working. Other factors, you may have this wonderful study where you go and you distribute its weather, but let's say it needs to be stored at minus 30 degrees and, now trying to distribute it to Africa and Asian countries, the equator, the thing doesn't work. The shelf life, the molecule falls apart in 10 days in weather and you have problems. These are things, these extreme conditions can only be trusted. So I'm saying, I believe that what we're going to see now is the ability to power these studies, not just with what is needed to get it in the market, but to have these quick feedback loops from the real world as these are being used. And that's going to be critical to seeing, is it working? Not only is it working now, is it going to work 6 months from now, 9 months from now, when when COVID, as per the WHO, circles the globe and crashes back again on countries again. In fact, we're seeing the resurgence in the US today right now, Florida and others having an unprecedented number of cases. So we need to make sure it doesn't just work now, it continues to work. So those are things you can only test out in the real world. And to those who say, well, that's not your double-blind randomized study, which isn't statistically powered, I'll point to something which, like Google, right, which seems strange to point to that. There is no dirtier, noisier piece of data than the internet. It's full of lies, mistruths, falsehoods, and what half of it is, questionable material I wouldn't want my kids to see. But yet, humanity has turned Google and other search engines like Baidu and Bing have turned the internet into the greatest resource of human history. There isn't a day you don't go by and rely on deep analytic statistics. Why? Because when there's a ton of data, you can extract value. Let's look at real world evidence the same way. How do we take this ton of real data and extract the value we need to get our drugs or vaccines faster to market, make sure they're safe, and make sure they're not just working in the artificial environment of a trial, but also out in the real world.
So you see a long-term benefit. I mean,
well, yeah, clearly this will supplement the use of double-blind clinical trials. I think we need to move to a situation where, so the first benefit is speed, right? The first obvious benefit is for us to do a study where I have to do, 500 patients in double-blind randomized trial for expense enough to make sure the populations are like, it's expensive. It's a reason why drugs take so long is one of the reasons why drugs take too long to get to market. Very important. I'm not for a second saying that those safeguards are not necessary. We're putting stuff in people's body. But the question is, so the first is if you can supplement it with real world evidence, you actually get to know what it's really doing, whether it's working, right? You might potentially, if you do this, the second thing is you could actually check which subgroups it's valid in versus which ones it's not, as opposed to this. The study was done in the case of the hypothetical lung cancer trial for people under 55. What about the 80-year-olds? Is it working? Is it not working? If you go off-label. The third is that once you start doing routinely, you can actually pick up side effects. Everyone knows about the Vioxx debacle, right? Where Vioxx was given to patients, with heart disease, and then it ended up actually causing worse problems. And as a result of that, that drug's been taken off the market, and COX-2 inhibitors, which are a marvelous method of treatment, are basically, non-persona non grata. We are not doing it again. It probably is that there is a small fraction of the population for who had tragic effects. But actually, if you had been able to detect it and been able to characterize that group, you may well have been able to say, using data analytics and collecting the data from patients in real time, find this out well before you had the huge number of deaths. There's a lot of data that shows after the fact that the spike could have been detected had you been, sort of looking for this. So get into the habit of routinely collecting the data almost on a daily, weekly basis to analyze it. So number one, the third thing is you prevent these tragic consequences from happening, side effects. But the fourth is actually define, it's not good for this segment, but it's still got value for this 98%. Let's continue using it, but let's add a test to make sure. So I see huge benefits if we move this way. Is it going to happen instantly? No, but I'm hoping that the fact that we have to get a vaccine out for 7 billion people, let's say we're trying to for 6 billion people of different ethnicities and different conditions, with different socioeconomic status, with different methods of injection delivery, we got to know what works, because we've got to get, and that's going to require doing this. So I believe that this is going to accelerate the use of real world evidence trials, and you'll have then all those 4 and probably 5 more that other people can think of that I haven't thought of the use of real world evidence.
One of the things that we used to do is that if you did a clinical trial today on aspirin, let's just assume that somebody just discovered it. In that particular case, based on what we were discussing, aspirin would have never made it to market. Isn't this a classic example?
I've heard it, and I mean, the fact of the matter is that you compare, it's a little yes and no, right? Yes. So if you took aspirin whole and just gave it, yes, and it causes bleeding. I agree, but it's a wonderful drug, right? And you're now saying, well, there are other things out there that are more, expensive. So if you took aspirin and there was nothing else out there and you did it, it probably would have been approved because the benefits were exceeded. So I'm not for a second saying that we don't need this, right? There are horror stories from the 50s and things with people mixing medicines, and this chemist who used a solvent that was poisonous, and people doing trials by injecting children with a disease, and terrible. Regulation is important, and I'm not for a second saying it's not. But I think we have to have a way of quantifying the benefit. We have to recognize that every drug has side effects, and but if you can understand what those are, and you can actually use analytics in real time to say you shouldn't be giving it to this person, you should be giving it. Here's the profile. Here's a cost benefit. Here's a cost, but here's the chances that it can help you. Here's the chances that it can hurt you. Then you can do a reasoned decision using data, and not data based on one person, but data based on tens of thousands of people, millions in the who are taking this drug and being able to measure what its benefits are and what its more precise indications of use are. Can I give it to the 80-year-old who has not only lung cancer but breast cancer, dementia, and heart disease? That's the question to answer. As opposed to saying, is it safe? Well, is it safe for what purpose, for whom, for things? And that's what using the data can help us quantify, as opposed to doing it and that's what the FDA tries to do in the double-blind trial. And so, you get approval for this very narrow use case. You want to use the other data to make it broader. I mean, I want to be very clear. I'm a fan of the trial process again. I just think it needs to be made lighter. and augmented with the evidence that shows what's actually happening when it's being used in not a trial setting where, you know, everybody is motivated and everybody completes all their cycles of treatment, etc., because that's not what happens in real life.
I think one of the things that we talked about briefly too, and again, I think, you know, we got the development part, and then I think one of the points that you made early on, and I think we have to retouch on, is things are going to start to change. And one of these things that will change is the relationship between the healthcare provider and the patient, and that's going to have a direct impact on our industry. I think your thoughts on that. I mean, where do you see this?
I mean, and so I actually think life sciences biotech industry is the health industry. I often say I'm in healthcare, but I spell it with an uppercase H, and that includes obviously the provider, but the payer, pharma, biotech, PBM, startups. That's the industry. Everything around serving the patient's health, right? So is it going to change? Well, it has already changed dramatically. Let's just fast forward back. Sorry, let's reverse. Sorry. You know, the surge came. We were like, oh boy, and we reacted amazingly. I mean, heroes out in the front line, our doctors and nurses. God bless them. We rapidly moved to, you know, learning from the lessons of what's happened in other parts of the world. And some would argue not learning enough, but we did learn. We repurposed, we shut down elective services so that the people who were coming, especially the elderly and sick, weren't being exposed to COVID. We converted those into COVID-only hospitals, COVID-only wards, right? And we stopped elective services. And so that was the react phase, let's say. And we are right now somewhere in the reset phase where, okay, the surge has gone by. Well, notwithstanding the recent data, that just shows that maybe we're in for a resurge, but let's set that aside for a second. The surge has gone by. It's still there, but we're in the sort of resetting, right? Okay, how do we get back to something resembling where we were? And we're not going to get back, but what's that? Then there's going to be, I would say, for the next 8, 12 months, there's going to be a recovery phase where we figure out how to, okay, COVID's going to be around, there are going to be surges up and down. How do providers deal with it? And this is actually not just for providers, it's for banks and grocery stores and pharma and car manufacturers. And then at some point, again, these are just approximate, these will vary from industry to industry, we'll have, you know, here's the new reality. You know, we may have a vaccine, we may not, but we still haven't gotten to 6 billion people in the world. We haven't developed herd immunity. You know, just because you get a vaccine as an aside, isn't a magic bullet. You got to get enough people vaccinated, and vaccines aren't 100% effective, right? The polio vaccine with 2 doses is 97% effective. So it's good. So these are the 4 phases, right? React, which we have passed. Sort of reset, recover, we're somewhere in those 2 phases, and then there'll be a new reality. So what's happening right now if I look at providers and patients? Number one, elective services stopped. They had to, and now when they're turning them back on again, patients aren't flooding back, right? They're scared. They don't want to come, right? So that's one thing that sort of changed. The second, right? So how do you get? So that's one thing that's changed. The second is, and this is to me an example you asked me earlier, what about data and analytics and digital, right? We did a survey, and I think a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, 10% of providers said they were using telehealth. Today, I think a couple of weeks ago, we were doing it, it's not final, 75 to 80, and I don't have the final numbers, of providers say they either are using telehealth or will use it in the next 6 months. So that's a dramatic shift, right, from 10 to 80, right? So this is now here to stay, and the patient doesn't want to come back. I'm going to tell you this personally. I'm not ready to get back on the Monday to Thursday on the plane route again. I've started to enjoy working from home, so I think there are going to be changes in many industries, not just. So you now have this new world where doctors are starting to deal with patients. They're trying to get them back for some elective procedures, but a lot of maintenance and stuff is happening. due by telehealth. So these two things, the shift in elective services, and then the fact that the fact that we've gone to telehealth are going to have some profound implications on life sciences. Number one, elective procedures, if those are being delayed, right, the med device industries, you look at your hip replacement, other things, etc., those are getting pushed off. People are like, I'll do that next year. I'll do that when I get back, right? So that's the first thing. So there's clearly that impact. With telehealth, you're actually just, for some of the drugs actually are getting better, right? The maintenance drugs, the cardiac drugs, the diabetes drugs, because physicians are now working proactively with their patients, they have more time, whatever, you might actually see an uptick in some of those drugs that are happening. However, there's reverses happening because a lot of people are ignoring sort of elective procedures or coming in for essential checkups, that you might now have a series of new acute events that will drive the need for other stuff. We also had this curious behavior, which we've been noticing in our data, that for some drugs, which originally were done, let's say, on 30-day refills, it was stuff like, even something like multiple sclerosis, people started going to 90-day refills, right? And sort of mail order and automatic refills, etc., which actually led to an increase in the use of those drugs. So this is something that is completely unrelated to COVID, and yet you're seeing this impact, right? Because of this change of behavior, whether it's, and the same for hip replacements, right? People don't want to get that done. But you're also having the situation that next year, let's just use multiple sclerosis as an example, you have existing patients and newly diagnosed patients. If patients are not coming in, and I'm just using this as an example, you could pick, anything else that's unrelated to COVID, are not coming in, your sort of pipeline of new patients for 2021 will be affected. You expect a growth as more and more new patients. So it's fascinating how that is impacting, and that's one of the things we're looking at when we analyze this problem. We look at data from like 65,000 signals we scrape, whether it's unemployment data, banking data, housing data, etc., social mobility data, as well as, of course, everywhere around the supply chain, all the way manufacturing impact, distribution impact, and eventually doctor-patient prescribing behavior, which is what is driving this. So it's fascinating. There are massive sort of unexpected consequences from this.
This gets to that factor of patient empowerment you had mentioned, whereas the patient starts to take control of their own. The 90 days, they try to manage it themselves. This is the move you're starting to see? Is it, or did I miss one?
So yeah, we talked about the digital revolution, right? And this thing, right? It's here, right? My kids, they are not going to be content to go with a doctor when they're my age. They're going to want everything on their fingertips of this. So I thought it would take a time, except that's happening now. As I said, what's going to happen is, especially as you go more and more to telehealth, you are going to start without having that face-to-face contact. You're going to want to get data, whether it's through home health devices, whether it's through an app about the patient, sensors that communicate with your phone, with your Wi-Fi router to send data, right? The second is the use of the app to improve adherence, right? There was a study done in Mount Sinai which found that patients who were given an app versus patients who weren't given an app were 92% more engaged. That means you actually double the amount of patient engagement by giving them a digital and then using, all the techniques that the internet is so good at, sort of gamification, etc., to get you sucked in and using it so that you're using it in all those behavior modification things that are out there. And, this whole host of techniques, right? Is it better to remind me with a phone call, a text? Do I need a person calling me? Email? It varies, right? It depends on me. It depends on my drug. And so we can very quickly figure out how to improve it. And that's so we think of patient empowerment. Yes, we are empowering the patient, the caregiver, to manage his or her own disease. But what we're also doing is part of that is helping them adhere to the right practices, get the right refills, etc., get the right diagnostic tests done, right? Imagine a future where, kits show up for self-drawing of blood, whatever, and you send them in, you get your test done automatically, and boom, it's prescribed, and your drugs come up, and they have smart caps, and Dr. Rao, you didn't take your, metformin today. What's going on? We noticed that you haven't, right? And simple things. You don't need the smart pill that detects in the stomach. I mean, if a good analog is, did I just click the bottle and get it out today, right? And add to it other data, am I traveling, am I exercising, am I moving? This is the ultimate sensor. All this is patient empowerment. It's actually giving me the data, giving me the signals that say, can I do? Just another, it's not patient empowerment, individual empowerment. We're talking about reopen America, restart America, right? And there's this huge debate going on. Should we take patient risk factors into account? I know this is not pharma, but it's sort of related. Well, instead of a company saying, right, you've got diabetes, heart disease, whatever, you're high risk, you can't come in. Give me the information. Let me understand what my risk factors are, same way as you would if you were pharma. And then let me make the decision. Do I want to let the company know I'm at risk? Do I want to say, no, it's for me to manage, etc.? Same way, how do I empower? How does a pharma company give me the information I need in a way that isn't, well, I'm going to get you to buy this drug, in a way that says, I will help you take care of your disease, or your, especially chronic condition. I will take away all the things you have to remember, all the stress around it, and just make it easy for you, reminding you to take your medicine, telling you when to refill it, telling you when you need to get a blood test done, telling you when you're getting symptoms that indicate that maybe something's been going wrong, all happening. That's the key. Give me that information, then I can take care of myself. Right now, I have to go and ask and find out. And it's not looking at the 5% of complex situations. You go, but the 95% that's routine, that's guideline based, let's automate it, let's make it possible.
So I think one of the things that I take from this is that in this current pandemic, this whole digital patient empowerment has been significant. I mean, it sounds to me like in the COVID situation, the patient empowerment, the digital empowerment, this has really played a positive role for people.
Yeah. I agree, and okay, and this is very, very cultural, right? I mean, Singapore and South Korea, are cited as places that did a great job, right? And they had a contact tracing app, and people were very comfortable giving that information, sharing that information, who you came in contact with, whom you came in touch with, right? So, and right here, there, I'm not going to comment on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. There are a lot of sort of civil liberty issues about whether we can or should do that, whether companies can or shouldn't, who do we trust with that information. But at the end of the day, I would, if there's a way for me to know that I've been exposed to someone who had COVID, or I have got COVID, not like everybody who have been, that's what I'd like to do as a responsible citizen. So there should be a way, and some of the great new APIs that Google and Apple, to competitors, work together to release. Again, kudos of examples of people coming together, will allow you to gather that information and empower the patient. We just talked about giving you information about your risk factors and exactly how much at risk you are, as opposed to going to the 15 sites and saying, this is there, I'm 7% more. But what does that mean, right? I mean, am I gone from like 1% to 7%, 10% to 17%, or 0.01% to 0.0? What exactly is my risk? Give me that information. Let me know whom I'm there, number one. Number two, I have friends, people I know who've had the disease, and they're like, I want to do, one of them was speaking to her a few days ago, was thrilled that Her plasma was given to 4 patients and all of whom recovered. Right? People want to volunteer to be parts of these trials, right? Because of these 110 trials going on and say, yeah, test it on me, whatever. I think there is a huge opportunity, whether it's patient recruitment, patient monitoring, ECRF forms, trials, all that. And again, let's use COVID to accelerate it because we're going to give this the vaccine to 6 billion people. We better be collecting the data. And we can't have site monitors getting each of that information. Let's figure out how to collect that quickly, safely, efficiently, maintain patient privacy, but do that in a way, right? That's fast, efficient turnaround. That's for the vaccine, whether it's for contact tracing, whether it's for quarantine. Let's make it easy for people to do the right thing.
You know, we have a great move towards personalized medicine. And I think you're a proponent of, you know, how do the analytics and the technology, how does that facilitate this aspect? I mean, we're kind of looking at, I mean, I see all of these things happening almost in unison. I think the pandemic just accelerated certain areas. But taking that out of the picture, I mean, the technology, personalized health is moving up. I mean, how does that all fit together?
So let's take a simple example, right? Which is, let's start with a non-healthcare example.
Okay.
I go on Amazon, I buy stuff. Amazon compares my buying patterns with millions of other buyers. And it tells me with surprising accuracy, Bharat, you may want to go look at that camera lens, right, and go buy it. And quite often I end up buying, right? So here we're using machine learning and AI to say, go buy this camera, go buy this screwdriver. Using machine learning and AI on other sites to say, go see this movie, you'll like it. We aren't using machine learning and AI to say, this is how my cancer should be treated. This is how my mother's diabetes should be managed. We are not applying that same technology, which we know is supremely efficient, to help take the influence data from tens of thousands of people. So it's sort of right. So out there to say what works, what doesn't work, right? I think we're going to, you know, everything we need is done. We've shown that it works. We have the data, the EMRification of America, right? The ability to collect everyone's trial, you know, got you that data. People, when they think of personalized medicine, say, oh, it's genomics. No. Any doctor will tell you they have been practicing personalized medicine ever since they came out of med school for the last 100 years, right? They don't treat an 80-year-old woman with the same blood sugar levels the same way as they would a 40-year-old man who had sort of the same. It'd be very different, right? Because there's differences in gender and differences in age and vitality, differences in family history. Maybe one smokes, you know, they do that, and they do that in their heads and do it very, very well. Personalized medicine, forget about genomics, right? I know everyone thinks of genomics. It's about taking the data about me, my patient, compare it with other users. And genomics is one very important piece, right? Well, let's carry this forward. So first of all, what do we want? We want we want all my blood tests, all my lab tests, all my history, all my factors. People go, oh yeah, that's hard to get. Let's enter it. No. We've got natural language processing and image processing and text that can extract the stuff. Maybe it's not perfect, but you've got tens of millions of patients, so you can start to pull that out. So let's take all the clinical information I have. Let's take information from our predisposition, which is the genomics. Yes, let's get that information. Let's take the images, which is another huge source of information, right? And you have all this data about my disease. If I have cancer, you've got a whole bunch of CT scans about it. And let's figure out what has worked, what's not worked, using machine learning AI and a hard scale, and then say, oh, this, you know, you really, you know, we have examples of this. There's a company called Oncotype DX, which takes your tumor and says, is chemo going to benefit you or not? phenomenal, because chemo is a very nasty thing to give to somebody, and there's no need to give it to them. It's unlikely. So I am a huge proponent of personalized medicine. And I think every piece of technology we need to make it happen exists today. But there's an even more interesting step, right? People say maybe 15 to 20% of the information you need about it, and it's vital, exists in your electronic health. There's a lot of other information which exists in this. How fit am I? How much am I exercising? What am I eating? You can tell, right? If you look at my bills, did I go to McDonald's, or did I go to the garden restaurant right next door and eat a healthy salad, right? How much am I walking? How stressful is my life? Am I triple booked? Am I traveling all the time, right? Am I smoke? You get all the, how many packs of cigarettes. It's very big brotherish, but if I choose to make it available to the algorithm, it can help provide me this information. So there's this information first about your genomics, which is your predisposition. There's your clinical aspects, and then there's your whole lifestyle. And I think we will move to a point in my lifetime, and I hope sooner rather than later, where all this information is being processed and used to say, this patient needs to be treated this way. In addition to the medical care, these are the behavior modifications they need to make so that they can get the most effective care from that disease. I believe that is inevitable. I just don't want it to happen when my kids, who will demand it, because this is the world they've grown up in, say, what do you mean I'm not getting machine learning and AI? I use it to pick which dress. I'm not using it to tell how to take care of my mothers. So before that, I'd like it to happen sooner. I think we're on the path, and I think if anything, COVID is accelerating it. But I don't see any other way. And anybody who says, oh, you're replacing doctors, absolutely not. This is the 95% of cases that cover most, right? They're going to be that is to avoid mistakes, to provide the information, let the doctor make the decision, right? Not the algorithm. It's empowering the doctor with this information, empowering the patient to do that. So I'm a huge, huge proponent of this. I can't wait for this to happen sooner.
So I think we're kind of getting closer to the end, and but one of the things I wanted to understand better is if artificial intelligence, or AI, I mean, you're seeing this as what's going to drive the beyond the pill or beyond the medication service. Have I got it right?
Beyond the what? Sorry, could you repeat that again?
I believe the terminology that you and I talked is beyond the pill service, or beyond the normal health interactions. Yeah. I got sick. So
yes, there are two aspects, right? One is pill plus, which is this notion of having this digital environment that enables you and supports you. But AI, and how AI, machine learning, advanced statistics, right? Different people call it different names. I mean, my area happens to be AI, but I've written papers on statistics. I mean, AI and machine learning, statistics and other sorts of things. To me, it's a blend. Is the key. And the other enabler, which you haven't talked about, is the cloud, right? You need ways to get data at scale in near real time. You want to take my data, you want to analyze it, you want to compare it with a million other patients and get back to the doctor while I'm there, not 2 days later, what the right answer. You want to take my image as it comes off the scan. That's going to be done by AI machine learning. Image processing algorithms, as I said, did a trial to do that. And, people think this is new medical image finding answers. The first product to get approved by the FDA was in 1999. A company called R2 developed an algorithm to find breast cancers in mammograms. I've personally worked on products in 2004, 2008, about 40 different products that went through various forms of FDA approval, looking at MRCT, X-ray, to identify abnormal structures. This is old. What is new is the fact that now with cloud computing and the advent of big data, you can do this at scale, right? With deep learning, etc. You can take millions of images, you can crunch them through what took my team, 6 months, a year with a team of 20 data scientists can be done by 3 people. You know, it's just, and the ubiquitous availability of data can be done. So cloud computing and big data are absolutely the enablers, right? The ability to process data at scale is essentially allowed millions of, tens of thousands of entrepreneurs around the world to do it without the earlier situation where you would only do it if you're part of a massive company that could afford this massive data center. I can scale up and down based on whether I'm a small startup, etc. The second sort of interesting thing I want to talk about is data virtualization. This concept where, we went from data warehousing to data lake, which is okay, which is great. There's one place where now we don't have to spend all this time cleaning up the data. You can just dump it there and do our computation on the fly. And now to this concept of data virtualization, it says, no, the data can stay in 15 different, 20, 30 other places. Let's figure out what to pull in near real time to it. So I save all my data storage, data ingression costs. These are trends that are going to intensify in healthcare, and all while meeting GDPR, HIPAA, CFR Part 11, what are all the things? All these can be done. These are technology, all the great technology cloud vendors. It's Google, Microsoft, IBM, Amazon, or Oracle have these capabilities, right? It's a matter of stitching these together correctly. So I think that we are on the verge of a revolution where we'll take all this data that's from genomics. Pharma will be able to take the data. Pharma will be able to take the data from sensors, wearables, etc., and very quickly decide this is a drug. Think of a real-world control device that for a type 1 diabetes, which I know some of these exist, but think about augmenting it with all the other information about activity and blood readings and apps to be able to continuously monitor the glucose level, for insulin pump for a type 1 diabetic patient, and with a sort of a closed loop real-time learning control feedback. Think of an asthma patient who will get a reminder, the pollution count's going to be high. May remember to take 3 puffs today. I haven't seen you do that. Take an extra puff today from your. And apologies if that is not an example to physicians, if that's not an example that makes sense, but being able to do all that stuff. And these are not hard. None of the things I said are hard from a research point of view. It requires the will. It requires technology companies and life sciences and healthcare providers to work together, with a trusted partner to make this happen. And I see this happening in pockets, and I think it's just going to grow and become more and more ubiquitous. It's going to go from being a one-off, which results in a newspaper headline on CNN, to being the way we do things over the next 5 to 7 years, in my opinion.
I think that's an excellent comment. I think we could leave on that. I think there's opportunity abounds for the industry. I think opportunities in the cloud abound for the data and the data management. And great, Bharat, we appreciate you giving us a very unique view into that section, and I'm sure we have enlightened a lot of people. With that, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day, and our listeners, and so that we can move ahead and we'll talk about this, and I'm sure we'll have these discussions in the future. Thank you very much.
And Russ, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this conference, and thank you for your time working with me to make it happen. Deeply appreciated.